go out and play, and play, and play even more. Good day, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to be here with you again on the Create, Play, Live podcast. I'm Nanette Saylor, your host, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Tracy Chipman, who is a professional storyteller. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the profession of storytelling, I'm sure you will delight in listening to Tracy as she shares what that's all about. Additionally, like so many of my guests, she also wears a couple of other hats. She is a yoga instructor and she is an Ayurvedic coach as well. And I'm sure as our conversation continues that we will see how those things weave together and inform Tracy's creative life. So thank you for joining me today, Tracy. Please introduce yourself to the group, say hello, and tell us, what are you creating these days?
Well, first, thanks so much, Nanette, for being patient with the process of getting this all scheduled and put into place and making it happen. I'm really delighted to be here, and the work that you're doing in the world, helping women align through this conversation of creativity. It's very powerful, and I think it's so ripe right now. So yay, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. I can't have these conversations alone, you know.
Well, I feel the same way as a storyteller.
Yes.
That's a great segue into storytelling. Yeah. And just, a little bit about that. I really feel so much of my role at this point. I've been storytelling for 23 years now professionally. And so much of the work that I do in storytelling is about educating folks. What does that mean as a storyteller? And it means many, many things to many people. Here in the middle of the northern Midwest, what I hear often that it means is that, you're a children's entertainer.
Oh.
And that is certainly or can be a part of what comprises a storyteller. And yet, and I'm grateful for those venues that bring me on board in that capacity. And yet the work that I'm doing in the world in my relationship to that craft is so much broader and so much deeper. And just to think, like you said, you can't have these conversations without folks coming on to engage with you in dialogue around creativity. Yeah. The same way with a storyteller. People think of storytelling often as a very static experience. It's so passive. People are just listening. And yes, and listening can be such an active, such a very intimate co-creation. And really so much of my work is to help people remember that. When you presence it, a storyteller, unlike an artist or a musician who works with their medium, whether that's, a cello or writing or drawing a blank, but I know it's there, their medium of watercolors. You can have an experience of being quite satisfied by what's being created on your own. You can play your instrument and have satisfaction if you really nail a particular piece of music that you've been working with. And as an artist, you get satisfaction from just that process of creation on your own. And yet, as a storyteller, I don't sit in my living room and just tell stories.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I do in a maybe a practicing capacity, but it's not the living art of it. It's not the fulfillment of it. So a teller needs a listener, and a listener needs a teller.
Yes.
And so much of my work is about helping people, like opening that door to people, like, wow, storytelling, listening can be an active experience. It can be a practice. And we all know the difference between passive and active listening. We know what it's like to listen to our partner or our children or the TV in a passive way. In fact, that's
Pretty common.
It's pretty common. It's kind of the way that we mostly listen.
Yes.
And if you explore that a little further and notice what active listening might feel like, my guess is people do that as well, but they just haven't made that distinction between the two. And storytelling is an opportunity to develop and grow that muscle and turn your listening into something a lot more participatory, a lot more active.
Isn't that interesting? I loved where you shared that the storyteller needs a listener, the listener needs, somebody to observe, somebody to participate with. And certainly as a coach, I've had the opportunity to practice active listening, right? That's something that we become very practiced at, hopefully, if we're doing the intent of our profession anyway. Yeah. And I'm very conscious that there was a period of my life where I was not active listening at all. And yet, as you're saying it, I'm trying to think of words that would help me describe to those who might not understand the difference or might not yet have really experienced the difference, what that looks like. Can you help us with that a little bit?
I think it's very individual.
Mm.
I think that one of the defining features of active listening is that you're very present.
Yes.
And that it's usually most often, other than the mind, making sense of what it's hearing through the ears, through whatever sensory organs are engaged, because you can listen through more than your ears. It's a monotask. It's what's happening. It's not part of a multitasking experience. I think to listen actively is to give your full attention to something.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yes. I know that was a big distinction for me when I recognized, first of all, that I actually could be mono-focused. For a long time in my life, I didn't think that was even possible.
Yes.
So, yeah. And then to recognize that the experience becomes that much more powerful when I did choose to engage that way. And that I wasn't missing out on those other things that I was theoretically blocking, was sort of my early interpretation of what I was doing, that I was actually opening to this fuller experience on the other side by being completely present.
Yes, and that word fuller experience is another very descriptive word of active listening. And it's a fuller understanding, a fuller experience. And in a storytelling context, that is a co-created experience. And I'd love to just unpack that.
Yeah.
The other energy or other skill, if you will, that goes along with active listening is active imagining.
Yes.
And that's a huge part of what storytelling offers. And just the whole word of imagining, imaginary. That is a word that has a lot of meaning attached to it. It's pretend, it's make-believe. It's sometimes it's
play.
It's play. and play's a powerful word, but it's often regulated to children.
Yes.
That's something that children do.
Yes.
And when you combine that experience of deeply listening and allowing the imagination to just settle into that deep listening, that's when people, have the experience. That's when it is actually this co-creation, because what one person is hearing and imagining could be quite different than what another person is hearing and imagining through their own lens, their perception, their experiences. And yet, storytelling is happening in community. It's happening as an entity of multiple people, usually, historically. And when you have that experience of the individual having their very personal and meaningful experience to them through active listening, through active imagining, and yet as part of a collective, I just think it's it's that paradox is super profound and very rich. And people
Yes.
have the opportunity to actually step into a story, whether they're stepping into that story as, this literal unfolding of what happened and what happened next, or something richer and deeper, more metaphoric or symbolic. Then it really, really, the floor just drops and a whole nother realm opens up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So talk to me now, that's piqued my curiosity. I know you are creating storytelling circles.
Yes.
Or a circle. Can you share with us what that is like, what that experience is? Because as you are speaking, I'm imagining a collection of very interesting options. So,
Sure.
So what does yours look like?
So right now, I have an online storytelling circle called Weaving Worlds Story Circle. And it always happens in this sort of composting time of the year, where here up in the northern part of the US and northern climes in general, it's the nights are getting longer and the fullness of summer is shifted and we are tipping into that dark side of the year, the time of dreaming and visioning. And if you look at, the Celtic calendar, it's a time of real richness and it's a time of rest. And it's an ideal time of storytelling when you have the time to sit in theory or in practice by the fire or a candle and just, relax, and somebody will tell a story or share a song. And so Weaving World Story Circle is about gathering at that arc of the year. And every sort of festival, Celtic festival day, for this present story circle that's just starting at Halloween or Samhain, and then at winter solstice, at Imbolc in the beginning of February, at the vernal equinox in March, and then in early May at Beltane on May Day, I record a story. And there's a group of us that commit to showing up for these various events. There's usually a prompt that goes out a week before, encouraging folks to start to prepare for the story as if it's a guest. Because stories, I believe, are living, breathing, troublesome creatures. And so inviting the story in, what is meaningful for you? What way would you invite in a story that you're not even sure what it is, but you want to make it welcome? And this can look like some people, draw a picture, some people write a poem, some folks just like to open a window, that sort of action of opening something to allow something in.
Yes.
Some people have created a little altar to the story. It's really up to them. It's just about preparing. And then around the day of the festival day, I record a story and send it out to everyone in the group. And I've thought about doing it live, via cyber, via computer.
Yes.
The idea that everyone receives it when they can and is open to receiving it when the time is right and right for them is really important.
Yeah.
And then when it is, then they have that experience with the story. And then I usually about a week after I send out a few prompts to consider. And there's a Facebook page where people can share what's coming up for them. And so really what's encouraged is not just this one-time listening of the story, but developing a relationship, a courtship, if you will, with the story for this 6-week period of time, and whatever way works for them. And this is where that whole individual piece, some people may share it with their families. It can be the stories can be appropriate for little ones, for families. They can be appropriate to take to your women's circle. They can be appropriate for any kind of self-development or journaling or dream work that you might be working with. Because then you notice where in the story are you pulled back again and again.
Interesting. Okay.
And where in the story do you feel uncomfortable? And, you try and find these little markers, what image really sticks with you, either in a way that really feels empowering or a way that troubles you, that triggers you. And that's a stopping point to, what is that? And investigate deeper in whatever way, and using whatever medium, that is going to be an ally to that revealing process.
Isn't that interesting? I'm drawn to the idea of listening more than once.
Yes.
For these opportunities to see where certain things either hook you or invite you in or speak to expansion or further exploration. I don't know that I've ever really thought about storytelling like that.
Yeah.
What comes to mind for me is, Audible, right? And listening to written words that are read out loud.
Mm.
And I imagine that it's similar but very different, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's very different. It's an oral transmission, and it lives outside of that linear format of literature. And that has its place. And I really believe that, it's true. Human beings are very hardwired to story. We see it playing out all over in our culture today. And yet, this notion of being literate and having a linear format of words strung into sentences, into paragraphs, into books is a relatively new experience for humans and their relationship with story. Humans have been accessing story for 20,000 years.
Yeah. And amazing when you think about the stories that live through us now that have been carried for all of that time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. So what drew you to storytelling? How did you find your way to this practice?
At the time I was living out west in Oregon, and I was a preschool teacher. Mm-hmm. And I had spent, years prior traveling and had a great affinity for the Celtic lands, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and had lived there and really felt a sense of home in those places.
Yeah.
And so this longing for me, when I came back to the States, there was always this longing that was present, longing to go back, longing to reconnect to what just felt so at home in me, in those geographic places. So I was really into Celtic mythology in my own personal life. I've been reading stories and exploring that. And so those two energies kind of met one day in my classroom when the group of preschoolers that I have working with asked me to read this book that I'd read to them about 14 times in the last week.
Oh.
Because they're all children, they love to hear a story.
Oh, yes.
And that is a very profound experience, because with each reading, with each experience of that story, they are taking in yet another layer, another deeper in their own being. Something deeper is
happening. Isn't that special?
It is. It's so beautiful. So on this particular day, when they asked me to read The Three Billy Goats Gruff for the 14th time in the last week, I thought, well, I had been curious about storytelling in the classroom, and I chose to not use the book, and I chose to tell the story.
Yes.
And granted, part of it was novelty. At this age, novelty is a really great motivator.
Yes.
But consistently after that, when I told a story, rather than just using the book, there was a different, more subtle level of engagement.
Interesting.
Even with the youngest, even with like 3-year-olds, it was a different level of engagement, as I could feel them engaging with the story without needing to look at a picture, without waiting for a page to turn.
Okay.
They were just drenched in their own imaginatory experience. And these children sat for, much longer than any of in my methods class. Oh, the children won't sit more than 5 minutes.
Right.
And they just were spellbound. And so from there, I continued to use storytelling in my classroom curriculum, and I had friends that owned cafes and bookstores, and I started storytelling out in the world for children. And then slowly, as I could develop and find audience members, adults who were interested in going deeper under the more literal versions and stepping into that more metaphoric, that more limbic space that and symbolic space that stories can offer us.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And I imagine then that is that space where yoga and Ayurvedic intersect with the storytelling, in that limbic space.
I think yoga and Ayurveda are so like interwoven into my life that they show up everywhere. For one thing, storytelling, yoga, and Ayurveda are all ancient oral traditions.
Yes.
Storytelling and yoga were not written down. They were orally transmitted from student to teacher, or from teacher to student for thousands and thousands of years. So there's that they share. Yoga, the word yog in Sanskrit means to yoke or to unite. And so I think that in that regard, storytelling is a bridge. And metaphor, the word metaphor means meta and for, if you look up the etymology of it, it's crossing over. It's a bridge. So there's that connection. And just the holistic experience with that, both yoga, mind, body, spirit, breath, awareness, and movement, and then Ayurveda, the unity of the body, the wholeness and the interworking of the systems, and their relationship to the seasons, and their relationship to the time of your life. There's, they're universes of deep knowledge.
Yes.
And so I think they all share that. So storytelling and Ayurveda interweave and bleed into my experience of storytelling quite easily.
Nice.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. It does. Yeah. It's easy for me to connect the dots with the ancient traditions, right? And this awareness. And I think it's fascinating to me that we're having this conversation this week, because recently it's been coming up for me in my morning journaling practice, this idea that what if we didn't have words? What if we were weaving our stories, if you will, in ways that are delineated by something other than the words we call today, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And because the words, and what's coming up for me is the limits of the words.
Yes.
Right? And so as you speak to this idea of simply audibly reading something linear, I can feel the limit of that versus the expression of the story without the, and I love this example you shared with the children of the difference in the way that they engage. They're not connected to this box, if you will, the boundary that is the book, the boundary that is the written word. There's by its nature, the storytelling becomes an expansive practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you for that, because it's really dovetailing for me some of this notion of there is an essence to the way that we experience our lives and share those experiences that comes forth in our creative self, however that is expressed, right? And it may or may not include words. And in today's time, it includes the language of our era, right? Yeah. But we all know those things are changing too. You know, it's funny, in some of my circles, we've gotten a good laugh out of the idea that, well, emojis aren't really that far off from hieroglyphics. So if we're shifting to a higher consciousness where we may not necessarily use words at all, is this use of emojis going back or going forward? Yeah.
So. Yeah, and the imaginal as a language.
Right.
And
yeah.
And here's kind of the paradox and kind of the tricky edge that comes up, is that as these words that just sort of flow or march across the page.
Yes.
And as words become perhaps less valuable as a currency of communication.
Yes.
I believe meaning is what words mean and the realm of how images play in as a language of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, this is so rich for me to talk about this. Beautiful insights. Yes.
Yeah. Really, really fun stuff. So when you practice your craft, one way obviously that you practice it is to hold space for your circle.
Yeah.
Do you tell stories from stage? Do you tell stories in the round? Do you tell stories with other people?
Yes.
How does that evolve?
Oh, it's a very organic process for me. I made a conscious effort when I stepped onto the storytelling path. It wasn't about going to get an education in storytelling.
Interesting.
It was a very inwardly directed impulse. This wasn't about going to a gazillion workshops to learn the craft of storytelling.
Okay.
It was just as simple as there's a story that speaks to me or claims me. And as I grow in my craft, it's about developing a relationship with the story, even a courtship with the story.
Yes.
And when the story feels ripe in me, then it's shared. And I do loads of public performing, from schools to libraries to memory care facilities, to stages where it's a more fine art experience, to house concerts, groups of adults that are keen to explore story in this way. I do workshops where we break down some of the elements of story, and people have the experience of stepping into that role of storyteller and sharing a story that they are courting or in courtship with. So it looks so many different ways. And I think as I deepen my relationship to storytelling, I've heard people have said, oh, you need to narrow down your scope. But it's such a joy. I think I see more that it's about deepening the breadth and depth of my relationship to story and not limiting it to who I work with or how I work. I get so much delight in all the different facets of how storytelling can show up.
Well, and I love that you shared that the story claims you.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we know this. I mean, just look, because people, it's easy for people to talk about books because it's we're very comfortable in this point in time. And of course there are stories, books that have spoken to you in your life, that have claimed you. There are perhaps books or stories in a book that you go back to throughout your life, and there's always another layer of something that's gleaned in the reading of it. And there's stories that you feel so full when you read them. It's like a feast. And it's the same premise, except not a book, just a story. This story that weathers and changes and morphs throughout telling and time. And I've
as you were sharing that, I'm laughing in my mind about the fish stories. I live in South Florida, so we have fish stories where the first time the fish story was told, the fish is this big. And of course, by the 10th or 12th or 15th telling of the tale, the fish is, 10 feet long. And I see, and it's informed and fueled by the way that it is received, right? And as the teller tells, and this I imagine is this point you're referencing as the co-creation, right? The engagement of the listener then fuels the storyteller to continue to expand the story, whatever that begins to look like. And in that way, then it does take on its own life. It's fun.
Absolutely.
Very fun.
No story is ever told the same way.
Yeah.
And that in itself is another rabbit hole to dive down.
Well, and I think that's interesting too, because like what you were pointing out earlier, in this difference between when you're at home in your living room, if I'm a visual artist, I just made a piece last night. I sat there by myself. I played with my collage materials. I created something. I could look at it, call it complete, get the personal reward from doing that, and done. Not the same as a storyteller, and yet there is this place for practice.
Yes.
And so, of course, in my world of working with entrepreneurs too, and particularly with women in transitions in their lives, many of them have written books. They then take to the stage. They tell their story.
Yes.
And that story is typically very scripted, down to the where I turn on the stage and where I pause and where I insert. It's more of a theatrical performance than it is a living of the story. And so can you speak to the difference there a little bit, and help us understand? I guess there's a part of me that's looking for permission to be okay with, I don't have to go by the script, right?
Yes. And you don't. And I did not come to the craft of storytelling through the theater route. Many storytellers do.
Yes.
And there is a distinction. There's and I can only speak from my experience.
Yes.
When I'm telling, I'm not acting. I'm not taking on a role, and I'm myself with the story speaking through me. Now, you could have another person who says, I am a storyteller, and their background is coming through that theatrical path. And for them to tell, they do stay on a script. They do step into character, and that's how they work their craft.
Yes.
And they're both viable and beautiful, and they can be, impassionate experiences. And I think the living of, from my perspective, not using theatrics, there's something about orchestrating that telling that has its own liveliness of generating response, and a turn here, a look this way, and the orchestration of it, I think, is quite extraordinary. It's not the way that I work with story, but if that's how a teller works with it, or an artist works with it, there's something quite beautiful and another different layer of creative energy that's being employed. For me, initially, because I was so hardwired to that realm of scriptedness and memorizing, when I used to try and memorize a story, when I was engaging in that courtship with the story, I would try and memorize a story.
Yes.
And inevitably, that story, if it did come off the page for me at all, ended up landing pretty flatly on the floor.
Okay.
And it wasn't, I had to literally make it my own and take it out of that script of memorized, this is what, and it let it have its way. The story, let the story lead the way rather than me imposing my desire to tell it. And that's how it was most freeing and most a creative process for me. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
it absolutely does. Good. Yes. Thank you. Because I was sensing that, and I'm certain it's because I have that as my own experience. I much prefer to stand in front of a group with a container, if you will, with an intention,
Yeah.
and to allow that to take its own form.
Yes.
And I am clear that that's a different experience than if I had come to that same room with a script. Not that one is right or wrong, good or bad, they're different. And I also have been in circles where I was making myself wrong for doing it that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important, and thank you for sharing your experience, just as simply another way for this still to be whole and complete.
Yes.
Right? There's not something missing because you didn't use a script.
Right.
And right, it's a different experience. And I think it circles us back to that idea of it becomes co-created. If your audience is listening and you as the teller are listening, you're experiencing what's happening in the energy of that space, and the story is taking on its own life. I know I've left the stage, if you will, at events, and people have said, "Oh, can you repeat for me this section?" And I'm not able to.
Yep.
Because I almost it just came through me.
Yep.
Right. And that's that. So, yeah. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yeah.
Because it's, again, in circles where we start to talk about, particularly in terms of perfecting our craft.
Yes.
Right. That there's this place, I believe, for all creators where we feel the aliveness of that's coming through us. And then we have that experience of somebody asking a question we can't answer. And so then we cycle back to oh goodness, maybe there is a way I'm supposed to make this more tighter or cleaner, or somehow tied in a bow in a nice, neat way in this package that is whatever I've defined this creative practice to be. Where, again, my belief, and as you're sharing with our audience today, it's the experience that is so much of the aliveness of it all. That's the energy that is the creativeness. The product, if you will, is only one piece of the experience. So,
yes, cool. Beautiful. And I think for women in particular, and for those of us that are more process oriented, that are listening on, maybe it's a more intuitive, more messy sort of way. I know for me, I would bump up against that. Am I doing this right? Is this okay?
Yes.
And to be able to be my own authority and say, this is my process. This is my craft. This is how it works for me. And then this other side of the coin that I had to work through is that, and they do it another way, which is how they do it for them.
Right.
And that was such a development, turning into a mature adult, that's what works for them. It's not wrong, just the way my attempts weren't wrong. The way that they do it, which is so different, is not wrong either. Because you can tell when somebody is authentically working what I believe is their genius, their gift.
Yeah.
And we're drawn to that like moths to a flame. Even if it's a different process than our own, to be able to truly appreciate somebody working their own gift, their own genius in an authentic way. And gosh, to me, that's just like the ultimate of a creative process on so many levels.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you found your way to that space, and that you found your way to sharing it with all of us, and that our circles intersected. It's so fun to me. Part of why I love doing this is that it provides me an opportunity to continue to connect in these ripples of the creative space, which takes us who knows where, right? It just keeps going.
Exactly.
And so talk to me about what do you have? So this period that is your storytellers, tell me the name again,
Weaving World Story Circle.
Weaving World Story Circle. I love that it's connected to the energy of the cycles of life, the cycles of seasons.
Yeah.
What's next?
I mean, this is the beauty of my profession. What's next? I have a number of performances coming up. I'll be traveling to Iowa later this month. I'm working a collaborative event with a total of 6 women, including myself, a poet, a singer-songwriter, and then 3 visual artists who will be creating like an event, a storytelling event with their art and their craft and their creative, energies in and around this conversation of narrative. And so that's, my attention's going to that. And then I've got a workshop there also happening, a women's workshop that's exploring the edges of the imaginal and our wild imagination. And I think at this time, as I really believe that humans are in a deep evolutionary process right now, and this time of making a shift from and using our imaginations to open them up to, if you will, uncolonize them or declutter our imaginations, which are filled with certain conditionings and beliefs and ideas that are no longer serving us. And so this workshop, I'm really excited to bring in both the realm of storytelling and yoga nidra, in fact, to explore imagination with women. So that
sounds delightful.
Yeah, that's kind of what's next.
Beautiful. And so at the core of all of this is creative energy.
Yes.
What would life be like without it?
Oh, yeah, it would be uncomfortable. It would be.
Yes.
Yeah, it would. I think I would be very unhappy on so many levels to not be able to tap into the fulfillment of some kind of creative process, because it's so much a part of my life, not just in my professional life, but in my daily life.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, as we move into this phase of wherever we are in our evolutionary journey, that I love that you said unpacking, this unpacking of the clutter, letting go of the things that we have used in the past to define us, right? I know a lot of the women that I work with, one of the reasons I know I was called back to using my creative energy more actively and sharing that possibility with other women is that when I wasn't in that space, I continued to be governed by whatever the rules of the game were that I was playing, right?
Yes.
And what I hear in your sharing about storytelling is that being in this space of practicing, allowing the story to claim you, right, allows us to just by the pure experience of that to practice being in the space of not playing by rules.
Correct.
Of some kind. Yeah. And when we touch that just a little bit, we start to then see how in everywhere else in our lives, those rules are limiting and creating the construct that either is or isn't serving us.
Correct.
And for many of us, we've experienced lots of years where those constructs weren't serving us, but we weren't aware of anything else. So through the storytelling, we have the opportunity to expand our awareness. And then if we're willing and a little curious and a little, and we practice listening, then we get these little opportunities to open that crack a little bit and walk in and to experience a little bit more. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And yes, I mean, what I heard there was, and this is what my experience is working with story and working with others, storytelling becomes an agency, is agency to freedom of one's own experience and expression. And that just lights me up like a Christmas tree.
Yay! Me too. Because my belief is that when we as individuals do that, then we as a collective become more courageous, creative, expansive, more inclusive, more, all of those things that we wish our society would be. And we're
conscious,
I wish anyway.
All of that. Connected. Yay.
Yes. And so, it's a beautiful thought. And I look forward to following along with your storytelling adventures. And so please share with us, how can our listeners get in touch with you to follow up, to learn about your circle, to see where it is that you're providing workshops? Let us know how we can continue this storytelling adventure.
Very good. Thank you, Nanette. The best place is to go to my website. There's a lot of information on there, but it's very simple. The website is www.listentoatale.com. And
all one word, no dashes or dots?
No dashes or dots. Listentoatale.com. And there's you'll find out about my work with the Weaving Words Story Circle. There's my calendar, so you can see where I might be telling next. There's work that I did in the Hebrides, actually connecting with the oral tradition bearers in Scotland and recording their stories. Yeah, so there's a lot of different streams of what storytelling means to me, and that's the place to find more.
Fantastic. So before we close, any last words you'd like to share with our group today?
Well, my last words would be this. I wish we had time to tell a story. Maybe next time.
Yes. So, that would be a fun way to continue this dialogue, wouldn't it? The next time we do this, we will definitely make room. So how much time do you need typically?
It varies. My stories can range from being 5 minutes to, 45 minutes or an hour or 3 evenings.
Well, we will definitely, that seed has been planted. So be thinking about, and why don't we do this? I will leave it open for you to, as the story claims you, anything between 5 and let's call it 45 minutes is fair game.
Very good.
And let's see when that happens, how it evolves. But we will definitely, I will commit to broadcasting again a beautiful story.
That would be lovely.
Told by you, that I would love for that to be shared. One of the other things I love about the podcast arena, if you will, is that once this goes out and goes live into the world, who knows where it takes itself, right? And so it's a beautiful thing to be able to provide that platform for people and for these conversations. My intention is for these conversations to spark other conversations, right? And inspire people to go on and to do things that they wouldn't necessarily have considered before, and to remain in that space of being open and curious and excited about what else is possible. So
absolutely. Yes. And gosh, thank you. And perhaps sometime in the heart of winter, we can drop a story into this.
Oh, that would be lovely. Yes, that would be lovely. And I can see that evolving very, very easily. So, All right. So I think it is time for us to come to a close. I will say thank you to Tracy Chipman for joining us, for sharing your gift, for telling us all about storytelling and yoga and Ayurveda and how those things intertwine, and piquing my curiosity, at least, about these ancient traditions and how that all works. And yeah, so until we meet again, folks, thank you all for listening. I'm Nanette Saylor signing off for the Create, Play, Live podcast. We will definitely be doing this again with Tracy, and next time we will get to have her share a little story with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for now, and until next time, stay curious, my friends.
You are listening to the Create, Play, Live show, where women come together to share how curiosity and creativity lead them to extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Nanette Saylor, and I'm honored to share the mic with some truly amazing women who have asked and answered the question, what if we stop adulting and live every day with the curiosity of a child at play? And these enlightening conversations will invite you to let go of outdated standards, make your own rules, and give yourself permission to play more than ever before. You have the power to create your life. Spend some time with us and you'll learn to see life through new eyes and challenge yourself to new possibilities. We may not solve the world's problems, but we will get you to think differently about your own. Come play with us. Listen and subscribe at createplaylive.com.